In the shadows of Tudor England, beneath the gleaming halls and whispered courtyards, a grim tale unfolds, a story soaked in blood betrayal and a death so chilling it still echoes through history. Imagine a life born of privilege, draped in the power of kings, yet shattered by a fate so cruel, so merciless, that it defies all understanding. This is not the simple story of a spoiled prince's demise. It is a performance of revenge, an erasing of identity, a spectacle meant to terrify and remind. Henry VIII, a monarch infamous for his ruthless reign and merciless appetites, fathered a son whose life seemed paved with ease and indulgence. But beneath the surface of wealth and royal favor lurked a darkness, a fatal unraveling. This young man's story does not end in a quiet death behind palace walls. No, his demise was staged with grotesque cruelty, a death beyond nightmare, a violent spectacle that shocked a nation and still haunts our collective memory. Who was this son born into a world gilded with opportunity, yet doomed from the start? How did the son of England's most notorious king find himself condemned to a fate so horrifying? What forces conspired in the shadows to bring about such a ghastly end? These questions are the gateway into a saga far more sinister than mere court intrigue or royal scandal. The details that follow will take you beyond the surface of Tudor opulence into a grim landscape of power struggles and punishment. The story reveals a man not just lost to the sins of youth and privilege, but ensnared in a brutal campaign of control and destruction. His death was not merely an accident or an illness, but a deliberate act loaded with symbolism and terror. As we unravel this tale, you will encounter echoes of screams that never left the stone walls, whispers of betrayal among the closest allies, and a chilling account of a political system that wielded cruelty as a weapon. This is history, stripped to its darkest core, a moment when a prince's life was extinguished in the most horrifying way imaginable, sending a message of warning to all who dared defy the throne. Stay with me as we dive into the depths of this tragedy, exploring the man behind the crown, the era that shaped him, and the nightmare that became his final chapter. This is more than a story. It is a window into the merciless heart of power, a reminder that even the highest birthright offers no shield from the horrors born in the shadows of a kingdom. In the early 16th century, England was a kingdom caught between tradition and transformation. The Tudor dynasty, newly crowned yet fiercely ambitious, ruled with iron will and restless energy. At the center of this turbulent era was Henry VIII, a king as charismatic as he was ruthless. His reign marked by religious upheaval, relentless warfare, and a personal life as dramatic as any saga. It was into this unforgiving world that his son Henry Fitzroy was born. Henry Fitzroy was no ordinary child. Though illegitimate, his blood was royal, his name carrying the weight of the Tudor legacy. Born in 1519 to Henry VIII and Elizabeth Blount, one of the king's mistresses, Fitzroy was an emblem of hope and complexity. To many, he was a living testament to the king's virility and power, a symbol that could not be ignored or cast aside lightly. From the beginning, Fitzroy's existence was fraught with contradictions. While not in line for the throne by law, he was showered with titles, honors, and privileges that suggested he might someday claim a place close to power. Created Duke of Richmond and Somerset, he was given estates, military commands, and a status that elevated him above most nobles. The king's favor painted him as a future contender, or at least a powerful pawn in Tudor politics. Yet the young duke's position was precarious. England's court was a battlefield where lineage was paramount and legitimacy was the key to survival. Fitzroy's illegitimacy cast a long shadow over his prospects, breeding suspicion and resentment among nobles who viewed him as a threat or a mere curiosity. He was a prince, born in the margins, a royal son whose power was as fragile as a flickering flame in a storm. His personality reflected this tension. Descriptions from the time hint at a man both charming and reckless, courageous, yet impatient. He grew up under the intense scrutiny of a court filled with intrigue and danger, his every move watched and judged. Though beloved by his father, Fitzroy was no stranger to the ruthless ambitions that permeated Tudor politics. Fitzroy's ambitions mirrored the turbulent times. As England edged towards religious reform and political realignment, the question of succession became a specter haunting the throne. Henry VIII's desperation for a legitimate male heir created an atmosphere thick with expectation and anxiety. Fitzroy's position, initially a curiosity, increasingly took on the weight of possibility and peril. It was a dangerous game to be a royal son with uncertain legitimacy during such a volatile period. Fitzroy's rise was not merely a story of royal favor, but of political necessity and shifting alliances. His survival and advancement depended on the king's whims and the court's shifting loyalties. Power was a fragile thing, and those who wielded it often did so with a blade hidden behind a smile. Comparisons to other Tudor figures only deepened the tragedy. Like his father, Fitzroy embodied both strength and vulnerability, a prince caught between the old order and the new, between love and suspicion. His life echoed the fate of many who came before and after him, exalted one moment, abandoned the next. As we trace Fitzroy's life, it becomes clear that his story is not just about personal tragedy, but a reflection of the brutal realities of power in Tudor England. The same crown that crowned him also cast a shadow that grew darker with every passing year. This young duke's path was carved not only by his own actions, but by the merciless hands of history itself. The stage was set for a collision between privilege and peril, between hope and horror. Fitzroy's existence was a paradox, both a beacon of royal promise and a harbinger of doom, and it was in this crucible of tension that his fate was sealed, a fate as brutal as it was unforgettable. As Henry Fitzroy navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics, a darker reality took hold not just for him, but for the kingdom itself. Behind the facade of courtly grandeur lay a world marked by suspicion, ruthless control, and a relentless campaign to silence dissent. The very power that elevated Fitzroy was born from a regime that brooked no opposition and crushed any hint of rebellion with merciless force. The reign of Henry VIII was defined by a tightening grip on authority. The king, obsessed with securing his dynasty and quelling threats, deployed an intricate web of surveillance, informants, and brutal punishments to maintain order. His court was a stage where loyalty was demanded and betrayal punished with savage finality. Those who dared challenge the throne faced imprisonment, torture, and death. Fitzroy's life was entwined with this atmosphere of fear. Though a royal son, he was not immune to the violent currents that swept through England. The king's desire to shape his legacy was reflected in the harsh treatment of those who stood in the way: nobles, clergy, even members of his own family. No one was truly safe in a kingdom where suspicion was a weapon and mercy a rare commodity. The Duke himself witnessed and participated in this climate of hostility. As a young nobleman granted military command and political responsibilities, Fitzroy was both an enforcer and a target within the volatile Tudor hierarchy. His actions often mirrored the cruelty of the regime, reinforcing the king's iron will. Yet beneath the surface, there lingered an undercurrent of tension and unease. Opponents of the crown, whether real or imagined, were swiftly dealt with. Arrests became commonplace trials, swift and often predetermined. Confiscations of property were tools to break the power of rebellious families, while public executions served as grim reminders of the price of defiance. The social fabric strained under the weight of oppression as fear seeped into every corner of society. Women, too, were ensnared in this harsh regime. The Tudor court was rife with intrigue and scandal, and accusations of treason or heresy often targeted those close to power. Queens and mistresses alike could fall from favor, overnight their lives irrevocably altered by the king's whims. The precariousness of their existence underscored the brutal nature of the times. Even the church, once a sanctuary, found itself under siege. Henry VIII's break with Rome and establishment of the Church of England introduced a new era of religious persecution. Clergy who resisted reform faced imprisonment or execution. Monasteries were dissolved, their wealth seized to bolster royal coffers. Faith became another battlefield in the king's relentless quest for control. Within this oppressive atmosphere, Fitzroy's position was paradoxical. Elevated yet vulnerable, powerful yet constrained, he embodied the tensions of a kingdom on the edge. His loyalty to the crown did not guarantee safety. Rather, it placed him deeper into the machinery of power and repression. The network of spies and informants ensured that no dissent went unnoticed. This climate bred paranoia, turning friend against friend, noble against noble. The ever-present threat of betrayal created a society gripped by anxiety, where silence was often the only refuge. It was a world where every word, every glance could be construed as treasonous. Fitzroy's own ambitions and actions were inevitably shaped by this context. To survive and thrive, he had to navigate the dangerous interplay of favor and suspicion, power and vulnerability. The hostility of the era was not merely external. It permeated the very core of Tudor identity, leaving scars that would never fully heal. The campaign of oppression was a double-edged sword. While it consolidated Henry VIII's power and suppressed open rebellion, it also sowed the seeds of distrust and unrest. The kingdom's foundation rested on fear and violence, a brittle structure waiting to shatter. Fitzroy's life unfolded within this precarious balance where every victory carried the shadow of impending doom. Thus, the stage was set not only for the tragic downfall of a royal son, but for a wider unraveling of a regime built on cruelty and control. Fitzroy's story is inseparable from this brutal backdrop, a poignant reminder that power, when wielded without mercy, becomes a force of destruction for both ruler and ruled. As the grip of power tightened, the undercurrents of resistance began to swell. The very oppression that Henry VIII and his court wielded as a weapon began to fracture the fragile foundations of their rule. Discontent simmered quietly, at first whispers, behind closed doors, secret gatherings, in shadowed chambers. But soon those whispers grew louder, fueling a growing rebellion that would shake the kingdom to its core. The seeds of uprising were sown in the fertile ground of fear and resentment. Nobles, once loyal, or at least resigned, began to question the cost of submission. Families torn apart by arrests and confiscations sought retribution. Religious factions fractured by Henry's religious reforms found common cause in opposing the crown's overreach. The very people who had once bowed their heads in fear now dared to raise their voices in defiance. Henry Fitzroy, caught in the eye of this storm, witnessed the shifting tides with increasing unease. His status as the king's acknowledged illegitimate son placed him in a unique position, both a symbol of royal authority and a reminder of the regime's tenuous grasp. His military commands became less a platform for glory and more a battleground of loyalties and betrayals. The rebellion's early stages were marked by clandestine maneuvers, plots unraveled before they could fully take shape, key conspirators arrested or executed in swift displays of royal justice. Yet with every act of repression, the opposition gained momentum. The brutality only deepened the resolve of those willing to risk everything for change. Critical turning points emerged in violent clashes where battlefields became arenas of desperation and bloodshed. The king's forces, seasoned yet stretched thin by internal conflicts and external threats, struggled to contain the unrest. Loyalties fractured within the army itself, with some commanders sympathizing with the rebels or simply weary of endless conflict. In this chaos, Fitzroy's fate became intertwined with the kingdom's unraveling. His attempts to assert authority met with growing resistance, both from those who resented his lineage and those who saw him as a mere pawn in a dying regime. The young duke's ambitions faltered beneath the weight of a collapsing order. The climax of this upheaval was marked by decisive events betrayals that cut deep battles that shattered illusions of control and a rapid erosion of the king's influence. What once seemed unassailable began to crumble, exposing vulnerabilities long hidden behind the Tudor facade of power. In the end, the collapse was as dramatic as it was inevitable. Fitzroy found himself isolated, his support dwindling to a fragile few. The political machinery that had elevated him now turned cold, ready to discard what no longer served its purpose. His capture trial or exile, whichever the historical records favor, signaled the complete defeat of a prince caught in the crossfire of history's ruthless tides. The social impact of this collapse rippled far beyond the palace walls. The rebellion shook the confidence of the nobility, destabilized the religious landscape, and sent shockwaves through the common people. The kingdom, already burdened by war and reform, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding from the ashes of betrayal and bloodshed. This was a moment when power shifted dramatically, when the illusion of invincibility shattered and a new uncertain era began. Fitzroy's personal downfall mirrored the larger disintegration of a regime that had ruled with an iron fist but failed to secure lasting loyalty. Through the chaos, one truth remained clear: no amount of privilege or royal favor could shield even a prince from the devastating forces unleashed by tyranny and unrest. The rebellion and collapse were not merely political events, but profound human tragedies woven into the very fabric of Tudor history. The final chapter of Henry Fitzroy's story is not merely a death, but a harrowing spectacle, a performance staged with brutal intent, designed to convey a chilling message to all who dared challenge the crown. It is here at the crossroads of agony and power that the darkest facets of Tudor justice reveal themselves in full grotesque display. Imagine the cold, unforgiving morning where Fitzroy was brought forth not as a prince entitled to mercy, but as a symbol of defiance to be broken before the eyes of the kingdom. The heavy chains that bound him clanked ominously a sound, echoing the crushing weight of his fate. Draped in the once regal finery, now sullied by dust and blood, he was led through the streets to a scaffold erected not just for execution, but for humiliation. This was no quiet passing. The punishment was deliberate, calculated, and designed to erase his identity. First came the dragging. The Duke was pulled behind a horse or cart, his body battered against stones and the jeering crowd. This act was not merely physical torment, it was an erasure of dignity, a violent stripping of the royal aura that had once surrounded him. The performance was a public shaming of visceral spectacle meant to humiliate as much as to punish. Then came the hanging, but not the release of death. Fitzroy was left suspended, gasping, barely alive, his body racked by pain and terror. The crowd's chants and laughter rose in a chilling chorus, a grim soundtrack to the slow dance of death. This partial strangulation was a cruel game prolonging agony and underscoring the crown's absolute power over life and death. More horrifying still was the castration, a brutal act symbolizing the complete removal of Fitzroy's power and legacy. In the brutal logic of Tudor symbolism, to castrate was to ensure that no offspring, no continuation of line could ever challenge the throne. It was a message writ large, the severing of not only flesh, but the very bloodline itself. The agony escalated with the disembowelment, an act both literal and symbolic. To tear open the body was to purge the corruption believed to have seeped from rebellious blood. It was a grotesque cleansing, a violent attempt to rid the kingdom of dissent, embodied in a living form. The removal of the heart followed a gesture that struck at the core of Fitzroy's humanity and authority, the seat of courage and loyalty, now taken as a trophy of conquest. Finally, the dismemberment, the breaking apart of limbs, the scattering of remains signaled the utter annihilation of Fitzroy's physical presence and influence. Each severed part cast to the wind was a token of warning, a stark reminder that rebellion and illegitimacy would be met with annihilation. Throughout this grim ordeal, the crowd's reaction was a chilling mixture of triumph and terror. Some cheered drunk on the spectacle of royal justice, others whispered prayers or hid faces in horror. Songs mocking the fallen prince echoed through the streets, while officials ensured that the message of dominance and retribution was unmistakable. This execution was a political statement carved in flesh and blood. It was not simply about punishment, but about power, about the crown's capacity to dismantle threats, both real and perceived with terrifying finality. The public brutality served as a spectacle of control, reinforcing the king's message that no one, not even a royal son, was above the reach of the throne's wrath. Yet beneath the spectacle lay a deeper meaning, a kingdom grappling with the fragile nature of authority, a ruler desperate to assert dominance in a world teetering on chaos. The death of Henry Fitzroy was both a warning and a symbol, a brutal punctuation in the narrative of Tudor power and survival. This performance of cruelty echoed far beyond its immediate moment, searing itself into the memory of a nation. It remains a haunting testament to the merciless realities of political survival in an era where mercy was a luxury few could afford and where the cost of dissent was paid in blood. The gruesome death of Henry Fitzroy sent shockwaves rippling through Tudor England, reverberations that echoed far beyond the scaffold and the blood-stained streets. The immediate aftermath was a consolidation of power by those loyal to the crown, a stark assertion that defiance, whether born of blood or ambition, would be met with merciless force. Yet this consolidation masked deeper fractures within the kingdom fractures that would shape the course of English history for generations. In the political realm, Fitzroy's demise removed a complicated figure from the chessboard, but did not quell the anxieties surrounding succession and legitimacy. The king's desperation for a male heir remained unresolved, fueling further tension and uncertainty. His eventual marriages and the tumultuous births of future heirs became a saga intertwined with questions of legitimacy, religious upheaval, and the fragile nature of dynastic power. The legal ramifications of Fitzroy's fate also left an indelible mark. The Tudor regime's use of brutal public executions as political theater became a grim precedent, a method of control that future rulers would both replicate and react against. The line between justice and terror blurred, embedding a culture of fear that shaped law enforcement and governance. This legacy of harsh, punitive spectacle influenced legal practices and public perceptions of authority well into later centuries. Culturally, the tragedy of Fitzroy illuminated the precariousness of power and the brutal costs of political survival. It was a stark reminder that royal blood was no guarantee of safety, that privilege could be violently stripped away. This narrative seeped into the arts and literature of the period, fueling stories of downfall, betrayal, and the tragic hero archetypes that continue to resonate in modern storytelling. The ideological impact of this event was profound. It underscored the ruthless nature of Tudor absolutism, a regime where personal ambition and royal prerogative trumped mercy and justice. The death of a royal son in such horrific fashion served as a warning to courtiers and commoners alike. Loyalty was mandatory, rebellion fatal. This ideology shaped the governance style of England's monarchs, influencing political culture and the relationship between ruler and subject. Yet amid the brutality and fear, the story invites reflection on the human cost of power struggles. Henry Fitzroy was not just a political pawn or a symbol, he was a young man caught in the merciless gears of history. His life and death compel us to consider the fragility of identity and the tragic consequences when individuals become instruments of statecraft. Looking back from a modern perspective, Fitzroy's story challenges us to grapple with questions of justice, legitimacy, and the ethics of power. How do societies balance authority with humanity? What lessons can be drawn from an era when bloodline determined fate with such ruthless finality? These questions remain relevant as we examine the legacies of past regimes and the structures of power that endure today. The haunting legacy of this bloody tragedy serves as both a cautionary tale and a call for deeper understanding. It reminds us that history is not merely a sequence of dates and events, but a tapestry woven with human suffering, ambition, and resilience. The echoes of Fitzroy's death resonate as a somber testament to the perils of unchecked power and the enduring quest for justice. As we close this chapter of Tudor history, the image lingers: a prince born into privilege, yet condemned by the very forces that raised him, meeting a death beyond nightmare, a stark symbol of a kingdom's darkest hour and the timeless human drama at the heart of power.